We do have some honored guests here, and that is Justin's wife and his little offspring.
I'm his mother.
Mother.
I'm Justin's mother.
Your mother?
Oh, yeah, that's the offspring.
Yes, but this is Justin's daughter.
Remember that comment.
Oh, wonderful. Good for him. So anyhow,
And the baby.
The meeting will still start at 11:30 with Justin giving his presentation. Obviously, he was pretty good because he'd been called back. You know, usually if the speaker isn't called back, he's not worth too much. So he better keep that reputation going.
Thanks for having me back. I'm honored to be back here at Cedar Village to talk about Jews in sports. Last time, if you remember, I talked about Jews in baseball. And today we're going to do Jews in basketball, my other favorite sport. On October 17th, 1937, a man named George Brown passed away. George Brown was a big name in the Boston sports scene. He was the founder of the Boston Bruins hockey team. He was in charge of the Boston Marathon, and he was the manager of the Boston Garden. So when he died, his son Walter Brown assumed all of those responsibilities. And this was 1937, late 30s into the 40s. And Walter Brown started to notice that there was a growing popularity with the game of basketball. And he thought Boston should have a pro basketball team. So in 1945, Walter Brown founded the Boston Celtics. The year after that, in 1946, he and a few other fellas created the first professional basketball league in the United States, and it was called the BAA, the Basketball Association of America. 3 years later, in 1949, it became the NBA when they merged with another league. And in that season, the 1949-1950 season, the Celtics were the worst team in the NBA. The Celtics were 22-46, worst record. They were doing poorly financially. So Walter Brown said, I have to make a change. So he fired his head coach, whose name was Doggy Julian, fired him, and then he gathered the local sports writers and he said, I fired Coach Julian, but I don't know anything about basketball, boys. Who do you recommend that I get to coach this team? And it didn't take but a second. All the sports writers said, you got to get Red Auerbach. But it turned into they started forming a basketball team. And in 1965, a fellow named Rod McKinley graduated from Samford University, and he joined the JCC, and they put him at the Cincinnati Post. I know McKinley doesn't quite sound like a Jewish name, but I think it was on his mother's side, right? So in 1965, they had a pretty good season. They went to the regionals of the big national tournament. So in 1966, there was a lot of expectations for the team. And the starting lineup, as I mentioned, Howard Schwartz was the center. At power forward was a guy named Jim Dworkin. The small forward was a guy named Maury Weiner, nicknamed Ace. He was kind of like a rugged, good defender, good driver to the basket. The shooting guard was a fellow named Ricky Scurro. You may know the name, he's a doctor around town here. And the point guard was my uncle Alan Berg, who's sitting right here.
Didn't know he was going to talk about me. He'd have just to see his speech. Thank you.
Yeah, Alan's nickname was Addles. He was a point guard. He was a wizard in the open floor, always made the right play on the fast break, solid shooter. They had like just a perfect starting lineup.
Thank you.
So in this championship game, they're playing the New Haven team. This is in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And with about a minute to go in a very tight game, Addles picks up his fifth foul, fouls out of the game. So they put in a backup guard named Richard Katz. You may know him. He's a sports agent in town here. He's represented Bob Huggins and a few other people. He was a phenomenal shooter, Richie Katz was. They nicknamed him Dampier. This guy, Louis Dampier, used to play for Kentucky, was a great shooter. If you gave Richard Katz the ball and said, shoot me 100 free throws, he'd make 95. He was that kind of shooter. So they subbed him in for Addles. And with the time running out, the Flame Club was down by 1 point. And the ball found Richard Katz, right about at the elbow, maybe? Was that about where it was?
Yeah.
And he let it fly and swished it to give them the 1 point lead. The New Haven team inbounded the ball, threw it down the court, nothing, game over. The Flame Club team celebrating. Do you remember what that was like?
unbelievable. You know, they're the champs.
Yeah, national champs. I mean,
First team west of New York, I think, to actually, you know, win it all. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
yeah. So at that point, you know, they're traveling back to Cincinnati. They're on top of the world. They're national champs. They're figuring their season's over, right? The undefeated season, represented Cincinnati well and had a fantastic run. But that was actually the year where the Pan American Maccabea games or Maccabea games.
Yeah.
This is the first time they had a division that was 18 and under. So that made the Flame Club eligible to represent the United States in, as far as in these Jewish Olympics and the Pan American Games.
Right.
So the natural choice was the Flame Club. And was it in Sao Paulo, Brazil?
Sao Paulo, Brazil.
Yeah, so it was in Brazil. But there was only one problem. How are they going to get the $8,200 they needed to send everybody down there?